Hey there everybody, it's JulieAnn. It's Saturday and usually I'm baking with friends today, but in this case scenario, today I'm actually just going to talk to you about extras, and in this case being extra by making your own pie crust. A lot of us kind of go into the grocery store, you buy a ready-made pie crust or frozen pie crust, and in these times when you can't necessarily go into the store and just get those because they're super convenient and they're easy to use, you can also just go ahead and make one with basic ingredients that you have in your pantry. And I promise you it will probably take less time to make it. I mean, you do have to wait for it to bake, but less time to make it than it would be to like go through the grocery store and grab one. So today we are making basic pie crust. So welcome everyone. We are going to use flour, butter, vegetable shortening, sugar, salt, ice water, and that's it. And I'm actually going to use today a food processor to actually make this a little bit easier in my life. You can do this by hand, there's nothing wrong with that. And actually, a lot of people like diving into pie crust and using their fingers because they can kind of see and feel what's going on with the pie crust. So depending on your level of how you feel about pie crust in general, you can go ahead and do that and just make the pie crust by hand without using the food processor. And all you would do is you use a knife or you use a fork to kind of break down the bits of the butter and the vegetable shortening. And I will talk about that when we get to the actual adding of the butter and the vegetable shortening. But for now, I have a food processor. I'm using 1.5 cups of flour, and that is what we're going to start with the base for this pie crust. We also have some butter and shortening that I will leave in the fridge for now because it needs to be super, super cold, because melted butter is terrible for a pie crust, because what you want is a flaky pie crust, and that flake happens when the butter is melting in the oven, and the shortening in this case, and creates the air pockets of the flakes in the pie crust. Can you make an all butter crust? Yes, you can. Can you make an all coconut oil crust? Yes, you can, and totally make it vegan. It's completely up to you. Some would say the vegetable shortening is a little bit of a crutch because it is going to guarantee that your pie crust is flaky. And I don't mind a leg up, so I am going to take that crutch and I'm going to use it to make this particular recipe, which was adapted from one from Ina Garten and from Aaron Sanchez. So we're going to take, I'm going to show you my bowl right now. My food processor is right here. I've got 1.5 cups of flour. All I'm going to add is a tablespoon of sugar, and then I'm going to add half a teaspoon of salt. Okay? And we're just going to go ahead and put that into the food processor. And again, if you're using a bowl at home and you don't have a food processor, you can just mix this by hand. We're just going to do a pulse. Really quick. And then that's it, just to go ahead and mix the dry ingredients. Now, I'm going to go ahead and grab my vegetable shortening and my butter, which I have conveniently stuck in the fridge because I want it to be as cold as possible. Now, you can actually freeze your butter. That's something that you can go ahead and do as well. And a lot of people like keeping butter in the freezer and they like grate it into their pie crust, or they go ahead and they have it at the ready. And that's completely up to you. It does make it colder. It's completely up to how you feel about it. But you really have to make sure everything you're using is cold. If you're using coconut oil at this point, it just has to be solid. Vegetable shortening is going to be not completely solid because, again, it's an oil. But it needs to be at least chilled. So if you're using the sticks, that's easy to go ahead and cut up the tablespoons for that. Or just go ahead and tablespoon out if you're using any of the containers. So I'm going to show you a view again of my food processor. So down here we've got the flour. I just put in the vegetable shortening. That is 5 tablespoons of vegetable shortening. You can put anywhere from 4 to 5 depending on your taste. And this is about 6 tablespoons of cubed and chilled butter. Now I put some of this in the freezer, but I primarily left it in the fridge. And that's to make it as cold as possible as we integrate this in. So I'm just going to go ahead and dump that. I'm going to try not to touch it because the residual heat of my body will make it warm, and that's not what we want at this point. So there goes the unsalted butter, the vegetable shortening, and again I have flour, salt, and sugar. And we are just going to go ahead and mix this up in the food processor. Now if you are not using a food processor, you can use fork and knives or a pastry cutter and basically put in the butter and the shortening into the flour until they resemble crumbs, like small little peas. you basically want it to be crumbly looking. And so I'm going to do this. This is the easiest way to do it. And you just check it a couple times. I'm staring at it now. It's a little bit... I usually have a cover, but I'm using my hand. And it's like, I go a little couple pulses at a time, just so that way you can gauge it. And again, if you're doing this by hand, usually when you're pressing your fingers, you want to go ahead and press the butter and the vegetable shortening until they're flat and they're small and they're crumbly. So I'm going to keep pulsing. What it's looking like. So now you're seeing that it's crumbly and it's piecey, and that's exactly what we're going for. And I've got some big chunks, I've got some small chunks, and it's integrated itself in the flour. Now what I'm going to do now is I'm going to add a 1/4 cup of ice water. Now I took ice water and I stuck in ice cubes into my liquid measuring cup, and the reason why I did that is because I want to make sure that the ice water is as cold as possible before I put it into the mixture, because again, we put our butter, we put our vegetable shortening in the fridge because we want everything to be extremely chilled, because those butter pockets, like I mentioned before, the butter, the vegetable shortening, all the pockets interacting in the high heat of the oven is going to create the air pockets and the flakiness of the crust. So it's really important to make sure everything's super cold. So I went ahead and put ice cubes. This is a 1/4 cup of water, and I'm just going to go ahead and pour out my 1/4 cup. Hopefully the ice cubes will not get in there. And I'm just going to go ahead and take that water and I'm going to put it directly into my food processor, okay? And now we're going to go ahead and we're going to gauge this. I'm just going to go ahead and pour it like this. You can also pour it through the spout as it's going. I just find that it's easier to pour it in all at once. And we're going to go ahead and pulse this. And actually, perhaps I should use the top so I don't have to keep on holding it. We're going to go ahead and pulse this a couple times. And what you're looking for is you just basically want the pie crust to come together until it starts forming a dough ball, right? And if it's dry, then you can keep on adding water, about a teaspoon at a time. And mine looks pretty good. That actually looks pretty good. So I can see that it's a little bit wet. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up the flour that I'm seeing at the bottom that's not integrating in. And see how this has created pretty much of a doughy ball, but all the flour hasn't incorporated in. So I'm going to stop my food processor real quick. And again, if you're doing this by hand, it's a little bit more control in that sense, but this is easier because you don't have to put as much elbow grease. I'm just going to put both sides a couple times. I'm going to look at it again. This definitely has formed into a ball, so that is good. And all the other pieces are pretty good too. I'm actually gonna blitz that for just a second. I'm just gonna go ahead and touch it. And the big bit that I touched was pretty wet, but it integrated with a lot of the dough and the flour, and it's actually pretty dry, so I'm not worried about that at all. It actually feels pretty good. This is still a little bit crumbly and dry. I don't think I'm going to add water, but I am going to, and see how you can see the flour that's still left. I'm just using a regular 6-cup food processor. If you have a larger one, it's probably a little bit more adept. And I'm just going to pulse this for a little bit. Just to make sure that there we go, just to make sure that the flour is a little bit more incorporated. It actually feels okay to me. I don't think I need more water. So what I'm going to do is all these bits, I'm going to go ahead and pull out, and I'm going to just dump this onto my counter, and I've lined it with some plastic wrap, and we're going to form this into a ball. So I'm going to give you a different view with my hands full of pie crust. So I have here, this is the dough ball that I had earlier. And I have plastic wrap that I put on my counter, and I'm gonna take that dough ball, the first bit, because my food processor was large enough. And as you see, this is a little bit crumbly. I'm gonna add that in. And we're actually gonna form the rest of the dough by hand. So I noticed that there's a lot of floury crumbs, and that's actually good for me because then I don't have to flour the board. So I'm gonna use this plastic wrap, and I'm just gonna go ahead and add the dough and the crumbs that you're seeing. I'm gonna try to piece that all together, and actually I'm gonna use the plastic wrap, try to make less of a mess, to piece it all together. The less I touch with my hands, the better, I feel, because of, like I mentioned before, you've got the heat of your hand. So everything that was crumbly before, if you're seeing now, it's all forming as I press it into my dough ball. And what I'm going to do, this is going to form one 9-inch crust. I'm going to go ahead and form this into a ball, and then I'm going to flatten it down. So I've gotten it to sort of semicircle shape. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to flatten it down just with my hands. Nothing crazy. It doesn't even have to be a perfect circle. What's great about making it into as much of a circle as possible is when you roll out the pie crust later on, you can go ahead and use that circle as you tilt it around, and you don't have to try to create a circle if it's already in a circle. If that made any sense? So this is my pie crust, and I'm just going to go ahead and flatten it a little bit more into my plastic wrap. And voila! You've got pie crust. So we just did that in about 10 minutes, give or take, with me babbling. And I'm gonna go ahead and stick this pie crust in my fridge for about an hour, at least, minimum. You can leave it overnight, that's completely fine. You can probably leave it for another day if you want, or take this whole thing and freeze it. The thing that you wanna go ahead and do though is you wanna go ahead and, actually I take that back, don't freeze it until you put it in the pie tin. I was just thinking about that. Although you can, because you're gonna have to take this out if you freeze it and get it to room temp to roll it out. So you can do it, but it'll make your life harder. So I'm just gonna take this, I'm gonna stick it in my fridge. And there you go, pie crust, we're done. And an hour from now, if you wanna go ahead and use it, take it out, roll it out into a 9-inch pie pan, go ahead and fold underneath, crimp the edges, blind bake it if you wanna use it for a pie that needs a ready-made crust. Or if you're gonna use it for a pie, like later on today, I'm gonna make peach pie with my pie crust. What you wanna do is you wanna go ahead and form the pie crust into the pan. And what I like to do is I like putting my pie crust in the freezer while I make the filling. So that way it's already chilled because your dough has been in the fridge, but because you've now put it in the pie crust pan and you put it in the freezer, it's gonna be even colder than before. And again, the great thing about that is it's going to achieve the flakiness that you want, because the high heat of the oven later on with the butter is going to interact and give you flakiness. So that is a quick and easy pie crust basic that you can go ahead and use anytime that you need any kind of pie crust. You can make, you know, a whole bunch of things with it. You don't even have to make a regular pie. You can make quiche. So everyone, hope you enjoyed that. Really just basic. And I will see you next Saturday when we will return with the normal baking with friends and bake something else in the Brooklyn kitchen. So have a wonderful Saturday, everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe, and I will see you next time. Bye.